Hello, everyone, and a very good evening to Immortal India's webinar series, episode 15. So, today we have our last webinar on the month of October, and then it will be followed by from the month of November. So, today, on the occasion of the last webinar, we have a really great topic and an interesting discussion to have about the name of the topic we all know from the poster, which is gender debate. What's next? So today, to enlighten us about the topic, we have a special guest today. So please welcome Mr. Akash Chatterjee. So talking about Akash, he is a student at Amity University, Kolkata, currently pursuing BA LLB honors third year. Also, Akash is a great student debater and also is a researcher. Currently, he has also published 25 plus articles in various research journals and also in various international journals. So, today I hope you all have a great session. If you have any questions, you can ask it directly in a chat box. So, Akash, a really very warm welcome on behalf of Team Immortal India. The stage is all yours. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Manav, for the introduction. And first of all, good evening to one and all present in this virtual platform today. Before starting, uh, big thanks to Immortal India, and so that we could pick up this topic in such a time when we already know the various ways and the various connotations that are getting attached to this particular word gender. It's no more a word in the dictionary or a concept in our books of sociology. It has trespassed all those boundaries and it is now a concept which needs thinking in itself. I would request the slide one to be shown, the poster for the day. It shows gender in debate. It is a dynamism on which today we are going to talk about. It is not something which is static, which is stagnant, which is defining. It is functional, it is normative, it is sociological, it is interdisciplinary, and at the same time, it is in a flux of a debate. People are arguing about it, people have their own opinions about it, and it is all getting molded up to shape something new in the society. Moving on to slide two, we have four aspects of our discussion today. And these four aspects are in the next slide, named as identity, consent, normal, and functional. Gender as an identity has been in much of a debate ever since the historical ruling by the Supreme Court in Section 377 of the laws in India. And ever since that, the particular concept of gender identity and identifying oneself, choosing of a gender, and the sociological attribution of gender has been much in talks. But in today's session, this is something which I will borrow from the concepts which we have in research, is that after substantive research has been conducted in a particular field, when a new topic or a new concept is welcomed by one of the researchers, they take a review of literature and they publish something new, which will simply move on to add on to the literature, add on to the substance, create an essence in the particular field. So, identity and gender, the sociological attribution, how gender is a product of society, or something which in sociology we term as soci fact. It is a fact that is firmly based upon its attribution by principles of the society. Today, identity is not just about defining identity. Identity is about accepting identity. And today's gender identity is not about categorically segregating it from biological sex or anatomical sex. It is more about identifying the particular concept of identity in the ambit or the plethora of society. Secondly, moving on to consent. Now, this particular word consent with reference to gender has its foreground in the different rulings by the Honorable Supreme Court and the other courts, then discussion on one of the social evils that perturb the civilized society today, the happening of rape. Consent comes into discussion in its maximum orientation when there is a discussion going on rape. But consent is not limited to a sexual consent. Consent is rather diversified, and it has different ways of perception, which we will be talking about today. Thirdly comes this very debatable and ambiguous word, which is also very relevant, is normal. What is normal is always a matter of debate. What was not normal can become normal. What is normal can again go beyond the purview of normalcy. Now, when we define normal, once again, we take the help of social attribution. What the populace considers to be normal, what is generally shared among the people in maximum proportions, what happens in relatively higher frequencies. But the very definition of the word normal goes against the very definition of society, because that unanimous whole, that ubiquitous whole, which is society, cannot necessarily fragment itself to one portion of it that is so considered normal. And the last topic of discussion is functional. Now, when we talk about functional, or rather functionalism, as a way of propounding any particular theory, as a way of propounding any particular discussion or a debate, as today's session is named as a debate, we need to consider one thing, is that what is a function and who derives the function, who falls a victim, or to be in a more positive orientation, who accepts and goes through that particular function. Gender as a function is to be discussed today. And from this particular point, moving on to the next slide, we'll start our discussion on how these different aspects are related, starting with defining it. Imagine the society in which we are all born and brought up, let alone segregate preliterate, tribal societies, urban, rural, all these divisions. Just whoever is listening, let let that single individual person consider the society, the community, the association in which that particular person is born and brought up. We are designated our gender right from the moment the doctors, our parents, they determine our anatomical sex. Boy and girl, the dichotomic heteronormative classification that has been existing for so long. And in breaking this, we need, we needed rather the functional approach of identifying, classifying, and opening up the ambits so as to understand what lies beyond our conventional normalcy. All those aspects with which we started our discussion today: identity, normalcy or being normal, functional, and consent. Now, where does the origin of consent stem from? As a child who is in need of a parenting, a sort of an orientation from the caregivers, not necessarily parents, whoever is caregiving the particular child, it is all about passing of the normative value structure of the society. And when the same comes to gender, it is not only about gender roles, gender stereotyping, the prevalent notions and conceptions of gender that has been prevailing. It is all so normal in the eyes of the particular class or the particular generation of caregivers who is caregiving and orienting the upcoming generation, that it calls for very less introspection. It is quite smoothly passed down to the child, who will grow up in that particular schematic framework, or a framework of schemas, a framework of cognitions, a framework of all that we believe and all that we possess in our mind as material knowledge. And then the child grows up into a caregiver in himself or herself, and the generation or the legacy, or whatever term we may refer to it, passes it on. Now, that is about define. It may seem strange that my attribution or my cognition, the way I, as an individual, not necessarily means the panel today here, me as a speaker or anyone. It is any individual per se. It is indeed technical and witty to think that we have our own consent, we are shaping our own ideologies, or rather, we are the one who cognize, who have the cognition. But it is even more strange to introspect and think that we are given the cognition. We are given the principles, the framework on which our entire base develops and grows. And that is precisely what is also shown in the slide as who decides. It is the society, the consensus of opinion that decides. Society is abstract. We cannot go and touch it. We cannot go and talk to society, but we can challenge the consensus that is prevailing in the society. And how is that possible? This is only possible because that particular consensus is about many people. It can be millions of people. It can be the entire world at large. If we talk about 17th century, when women's education had been a taboo in a maximum of the nations, we will come into a special discussion about India today. But before that, just to finish my last point, is that when we talk about such a thing as education getting tabooed, education getting restricted, or if we talk about India as a whole, the society of India as a whole, the problem of caste which we had, or worse still, the problem of gender violence, these are certain things which the society shares as a consensus time to time, and they need to be challenged, they need to be broken down. Such conceptions need to be mutilated. And when does that start? When we, as individual products of society, being in it, thriving in it, refuse to consent. If I today consent with what the consensus believes, I am conforming to it. But if I choose not to be a conformist, and if I choose to disagree with the prevailing consensus, I need to stop consenting. That's where the entire debate begins. Now, thirdly is using it, and fourthly, applying it. Using and applying is all about those people, those persons who are there, subjected in the society. They consent to it and then they use it. Your gender identity has been presupposed, predefined. Boy and girl dichotomous classification, as it had been existing for so long, has been made. You have been subjected to that one schematic framework, and then you have consented to it, and you move on with it, you start using and applying it, until one day you realize that it is myopic, it is restricted, it needs to open up, it needs to be more assimilative. There you stop consenting and you start being non-conformative, and there the gender debate begins. And how is it important? We have already seen the tremendous stereotypical trauma, the tremendous anomaly which, as a whole, a particular spectrum of sexuality had faced, so as to bring them into recognition. When we talk about the age old campaign of homosexuality, when in India, we find how a digression from normalcy had been the first thing which had brought about such a derogatory section of 377 in our Indian Penal Code. It is all rooted in the past. If we keep analyzing, we find the clues to the anomalies in society. But if we want to change it, before activism, we need to stop consenting. One of the brilliant examples of consent in Indian society was during the prohibition of sati in the 19th century. The biggest argument that was put up by both the sides, by the orthodox Brahminical side as well as the liberal ideologies, the biggest point was about consent, whether the woman is wanting to commit sati or not, whether she is consenting to sati or not. The same thing came up with widow remarriage, 1855 to 1857, when when the Bengal society primarily witnessed its phenomenal change in a legislative proclamation allowing the widows to remarry. The principal contention of debate was once again consent, whether the particular widow is enabled from her inside will to remarry. So, consent is that one point which has always been a heated crux, a heated point of discussion and debate. Moving to the next slide, we have now we start with some examples. As we already know that it is a virtual platform, and in virtual platform we often tend to lose our concentration. So in order to make the session interesting, what I have supposedly planned to do today is I'll show certain examples with the help of pictorial illustrations. Definitely I'll show certain examples of people stretching across history, people, events, incidents stretching across history till today's time, and I leave the conclusion up to all who are listening today, that what will gender be in the future and how the gender debate will go on in the future. Starting from something which is in early Vedic time, the picture of Gargi Vachak Navi, a theologist, a philosopher in the early Vedic times, and she was notorious in her debates, especially with one sage, Yagnavalkya, in the courtroom of Maharaja Janak when Sita was a child, as elaborated both in Ramayana the epic and in different Puranas and scriptures, we find her mentioned. Now, why is she important as a person in our today's debate? Gargi Vachaknavi in early Vedic society was not only a liberated educationist, but she was a person illustrating boldly the conception of consent. She refused to consent to the ordinarily normal life that was given to females, to marry, to raise up kids, children, and to take care of the household. Now, this particular gender role stereotyping was defeated by her when she chose not to marry, when she chose to practice and profess education in the system of Gurukul that was mainly confined to male sages and rishis, as we call them in Sanskrit. Now, why is she important? It's because she is a glaring example of nonconformist and refusing to consent. And how did the society treat her? It was not only was her teachings and her educationist ideologies and philosophy celebrated, but she was termed as swatantra, independent. And being independent in thought and practice is not derogatory. It is being nonconformist. It is bringing up innovative ideologies to the forefront. Moving to the next slide. We have Gupta period, and these particular coins, they show probably the first female monarch of India, Prabhavati Gupta. She was the daughter of King Chandragupta Vikramaditya II, who is very celebrated as having the Navaratna in his court, as having the throne of justice on which whoever would sit would deliver justice. And we have so much about Gupta period to learn and know of, the golden age of India to be precise. But how much and how far did we know about this first female monarch of India, Prabhavati Gupta? Very less. The frequency is less. The stretch of knowledge and literature about her is less. Going back to something which I had mentioned in my second slide, normal. Isn't it normal to study our female monarchs as in such celebration as we study our male monarchs of the country? Is it defying the standards of normalcy when we bring up something that is much less frequented on the forefront? It's not. It is choosing not to consent, not to be a conformist, going beyond the conventional consensus and digging out those portions of history which has been long lost under our prevailing neglect. That's the word which is to be used, neglect. We have been channelized into learning in such a way by the conventional consensus that we always tend to consent and become a conformist. We need to venture out from that. Prabhavati Gupta, the first female monarch of her time in the Guptas, in the Gupta era, after losing her husband and acting as a guardian, as a regent of the estate in the particular dynasty where she was wed, she took up the reins of administration, led armies to the battlefield. Now, she is another glaring example of a nonconformist, choosing not to consent, choosing not to agree with the conventional prevailing setup, having the confidence and setting out. Moving to the next slide, we have something that I had promised in my today's session today, that I will be discussing about one of the first criminal cases after the promulgation of Indian Penal Code in the country. This case in the year 1875, this is a very famous portrait and a school of paintings as elaborately found, especially in the Kalighat school of paintings in Bengal. This particular painting shows the murder of Elokeshi, and it is the husband who is butchering the wife. The wife was killed by the husband when she was suspected of an extramarital affair with a head priest in Tarokeshwar. This particular genre of paintings is very wide and common, but seldom do we know about this Elokeshi murder case and what happened afterwards. In this infamous case rather, infamously gender oriented case, we found how the husband suspected the innocent wife of an extramarital affair with a head priest, and the wife was sent to the head priest for a cure to some fertility problems which she was probably suffering from. And thereafter, there was a relation that grew between the head priest and Elokeshi. Now, the husband, on finding out, simply butchered her head off, and there was criminal proceedings. Sessions Court at Hooghly entertained the case, and thereafter it went upon appeal to Calcutta High Court, which was established by then after 1861. This case was in 1875. The trial was in late 1875. The husband was convicted of murder, but when the husband came out, this particular man, the crowd mobbed him and released him. The crowd mobbed the court guards and the police personnel who was there, because the crowd determined that the woman Elokeshi, the lady Elokeshi, had got her desired punishment because of an extramarital affair, something that the society considered immoral at that particular point of time. And why am I talking about society? Because once again, it is the celebrated conventional consensus to which we keep on conforming. And as we conform to it and become conformists, we quite almost forget this conception of consent. We keep on consenting, and such incidents come up. Citing this was important today because we need to consider and we need to think how every social or socio-legal phenomenon is deeply rooted in the gender complex. Coming to the next slide now. We'll talk about Begum Hazrat Mahal, who was a revolutionary, a fighter, commanding battles even in 1857 Sepoy Mutiny. She started her career to fame as being in the royal harem of the Lucknowi Nawabs of 1857. And once again, why is this important? Is because when we talk about a particular lady who is in the royal harem and then leading her political career up to being a revolutionary fighter in the Sepoy Mutiny, we find no greater example of a nonconformist, not consenting, and rejecting the conventional consensus. Moving to the next slide, there is something that I had been talking about, dichotomy. And this is the dichotomy which the slide shows. Boy and girl. Till now, what we have discussed had been restricted to this dichotomy. But it is important that we breach the dichotomy with increasing waves of liberalism. It is very interesting to note how scriptures, how interpretations have changed just to fit this dichotomy, just to fit this heteronormativity. Anatomical medical developments, which was largely centered around British and the British culture and Britain in late 18th century, has developed this heteronormative notion from the Victorian morality. And that is precisely the reason why 377 was there in the first place in our Indian scenario, Indian legal scenario, because we find gender fluidity in our ancient scriptures. We find men dressing as women. We find the emperors who, when used to go to peers, to dress as women. We find bhakti ras in scriptures where men dance as women. We find references to Ras Leela in our Bhagavatam, which is one of the scriptural sources of history in Indian scenario, where we find men dancing in the garb of women, cross dressing. So why did the society suddenly become so constrictive with all these heteronormative and dichotomous notions? It was definitely a development, but more so the absence of a refusal to consent, the absence of a refusal to conform. The more we keep on consenting, the more we conform, the greater the prevailing consensus will prevail. And that is something which we have shown, which we have seen, which the society has seen in the historic progression it has made. The next slide, which was on heteronormativity, I have clubbed the both and shown that. So I'll move on to the next one now, which is post-truth. Keeping the fingers crossed is one symbol. This is actually a cover of a book which I found out. I really appreciate this particular symbol for post-truth, this particular symbol of keeping the fingers crossed, because post-truth is all about not simply confabulating the truth. It is about normative notions of truth. It is a disbalance of what is factual scientific truth and what the emotional appeal considers to be the truth. And post truth is definitely not about a political agenda which the world faces today. Gender has its role in that, which is because today's gender activism, or the dynamism of gender which we see today, has already breached the heteronormative barriers. We now stand at the threshold where the society needs to open up. Assimilation needs to be increased. Integration needs to be entertained at the highest possible level. And lastly, the dimensions of consent need to be reappreciated in the light of new evidence which is coming up. How far will I consent? How much will I consent? And if I consent, how will I be functional? The one point which I said in my first slide, that what is functionalism? Who is a victim to it? Who is a part of it to be more positive? It is us, the same people who choose to either confirm or not. Now, coming towards the conclusion, the next slide we have activism. Activism is one biggest example of a consensus, not a prevailing conventional consensus, an upcoming wave of consensus. When there is a particular segment of society that starts recognizing something new, that starts driving itself towards bringing that something new, that some change in its ambit. And in our next slide, we have the concept of equality. Now, equality, the debates about equality, starting from equal pay, equal education, equal facilities, intervention, the world today has changed. It is indeed redundant to talk about that we need equality. We need equality. Why is it redundant? Because it's already recognized. People know. But what do we need now? We need the concept of consent in equality as well. Being equal, having privileges, using them in the direction and consenting to what I have been granted is something that will drive the gender debate now. It is something that people in this flux and whirlpool of gender debates, people as in us, everyone, it's not about someone who is privileged enough to have not faced any discrimination and someone who is not privileged enough to have always faced discrimination will toss upon. It is not a toss between two binary opposites. It is a functional conception that we need to internalize in ourselves. It is about charting equal paths for everyone to lead their own race in their own tracks individually. It is not about overcrowding on one particular track to end up everything in a mess. It is about having the right to run the race with everyone and keeping the starting point same. With the starting point same, with the right to run, with an attitude of not conforming to that which I, as a person, as an individual, do not consent, the gender debate is on track. Even today, we have huge variations. Gender debate is today a luxury in hunger and poverty stricken areas where they do not have the sustenance to survive. Gender debate, even today, is a luxury in certain places where the basic instinct of survival is scanty. People are somehow leading their lives, let alone concern themselves with gender and luxurious topics. It is not that. Conformist, consent, functional, normative, normalcy, these are everywhere. These are as ubiquitous as the existence of society. And today, standing at this particular point of gender debate, we have something new, which is our last slide for today. And in this last slide, we have this particular symbol. Now, this symbol can be interpreted in different ways: psychological, philosophical, in any number of ways possible. We can decode and use this symbol. Why have I used it in my gender debate presentation today? It is because while one aspect is developing, there remains a scar that needs to be fulfilled. And while another aspect which seems to be lacking the development, there needs to be a hope which has to be poured in, filled in as a loophole to stretch its limitation. To make the society whole, wholesome, and assimilative, the onus is upon us now. How the gender debate will be in the future and gender debate, what's next? This entire discussion today, I have simply shown 4 concepts with which I started: identity, the way I am being identified and the way I am identifying, and how society is trying to identify me; consent, where and to what extent should I, and exactly where should I stop so as to be a nonconformist in the areas where it is needed; normalcy, how is the particular concept of normal being imposed upon us and how we define normalcy; and lastly is being functional, the entire gamut of functionalism that is driving the society today. Who are we in this ambit of society? How am I recognized? How is society recognizing me? And what is this dynamic interaction which is continuously going on? It is all a part of the gender debate that is going on, that is running, that is in its full wrap today. Consent is not simply sexual, consent is sociological. Gender is not simply sociological, it is intrinsic. It is both private as well as to be recognized on the public scale. Functionalism is not simply a concept, it is a reality. that we need to identify and understand. And identity, lastly, is what I make myself. I make of myself. I make in myself, and how I am making it in front of the others. C.H. Cooley, sorry, was a famous theorist who had given this looking glass self theory of sociology, where people and their attribution about us enable us to make a version of ourselves. And who are these people once again? That consensus, which is conventional and unrefuted, to which we give consent, and that is society. Society is once again not a person, it's abstract, and it thrives on this particular notion that we uphold, and then that is passed on to the generations. If we need to drive the change, and the change today is needed, it is needed in its entire importance, it is needed in different aspects. And if we really want to drive the change today, then we must stop consenting in those areas where we should not. Categorizing, strategically categorizing, classifying, assimilating, integrating, and then thriving and existing in the very same society. That's where I conclude. Thank you once again, everyone. Stay safe, and let's have a lovely festive session ahead. It's over to you, Manav.
So, friends, we had a really great session with Akash today. Hope you all had a really great time. Thank you all for being here today and witnessing a great debate. I hope you all had a great time. So, we are today on behalf of Immortal India. This is me, Manav Soni, signing off. And I hope you all had a great time today. We'll be back in the month of November. So, today we are signing off for October. And on behalf of entire team Immortal India, we wish you all a great festive season ahead. Have a great time and a great day ahead. So till then, take care, stay safe, and have a great day ahead. This is me, Manav Soni, along with Akash Chatterjee, signing off for today. And we'll be letting you all know regarding the various upcoming schedule in the month of November. But before that, once again, I'll be mentioning about the workshop which we are going to have regarding safety and self defense by Kajal Pandey. If you have anything, like if you are really interested, you can look into the website of Immortal India, and then we'll surely get in touch with you. Thank you all and have a great day ahead. We are signing off now.